Hello and welcome to the TR Talk Show, the Therapeutic Recreation and Recreation Therapy show for discussion about all the topics related to TR and RT. This is episode number 1, August 20th, 2019. We're hoping in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will be adding co-hosts and special guests to the show. We wanted to go ahead and get the ball rolling and get things started because the momentum is so important. And we're still getting the studio set up here, so pardon the adjustments and such. And a brand new microphone, so hopefully the audio isn't too far off. And it is the first time streaming this show on the RPG Therapeutics channel, which doesn't yet have a dedicated URL. We have to get to a certain number of followers, etc., before YouTube will allow us to create a dedicated name, but hopefully we'll be able to get that fairly soon. So unfortunately, the channel URL is not easy to find. The best thing is to go to trtalkshow.com, and there's a link there to watch the live streams. So this show is live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And initially the show will probably only be 20, 30, 45 minutes, but we hope to eventually get up to a full hour in content, and maybe even sometimes go a little over if we're covering some detailed content or have a number of special guests and such. So this show will cover therapeutic recreation news and TR in the news. Licensing updates state by state, any progress being made in those areas, either state by state or federally. Job openings of note. It won't be every job opening, but when we see something that catches our eye and people want us to kind of maybe help spread the word out, we're happy to do so. Theory discussion. We will cover a lot of relevant theories related to to therapy recreation. I should let you know, I'm founder and president of RPG Research and RPG Therapeutics. RPG Research is a nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization studying the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives. And RPG Therapeutics is a for-profit professional services organization and providing recreation therapy, music, and role-playing games and other services. So sometimes I inadvertently will say RPG when I mean TR and TR when I mean RPG, because both of those businesses are built heavily on the TR models and methodologies and theories. And so a lot of the role-playing game theory and such is TR greatly informs enhancing the role-playing game experience. And so pardon me if I sometimes accidentally slip in the RPG thing. We have the RPG Talk Show, and we broadcast through RPG Research half a dozen or more times a week, plus we run multiple community programs every week. And so I use the word RPG a lot, and so pardon me if I accidentally slip those in. I'll try to keep it clean, but I already slipped that up. So you can comment on the stream when we're live. So when you go to trtalkshow.com and click to the live stream, when the show is running, you can go ahead and comment in the chat room. I have a big screen up here where I can see your comments and I can respond to them. Or after it's a recorded archive, you can post comments through YouTube. And we'll try to answer your questions on the following show. We'll try to keep an eye open for those. You can also email rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com. Eventually we'll have a separate email for the TR Talk Show, but we're still getting all that set up. Again, this is episode 1. I don't have any special guests or co-hosts yet. I kind of have a build it and they will come approach to things. I've done that for decades with multiple businesses, and it's worked out pretty well. It is a momentum thing. We get things started, word slowly spreads, and things grow from there. So, news, licensing, job openings, theories, methodologies. Also, we'll try to do some occasional program and TRS spotlights. So we'll hopefully focus on a specific program somewhere in the world or a specific therapeutic recreation specialist somewhere in the world who's doing something either towards advocacy or innovation in TR. And then, as I said, hopefully we'll have some co-hosts and special guests over time to bring on here. It's always much more interesting instead of a single person listening to me go on, to have a dialogue and interjection from co-hosts. And so if we can get one or two other co-hosts at least here, probably remote, but you never know. We've got quite a few rec therapists here in Spokane, Washington, where I'm based. Eastern Washington University has an excellent TR program run by Professor Emily Messina, who's very active in the TR community. She's been president of the Washington State Therapeutic Recreation Association. I'll probably be asking her to come out and speak on the show, either remotely or in person, at least as a guest. She probably has way too busy a schedule to be a regular co-host. I think she's on 14 different boards or something. one of my other employees was telling me. So, but we'll definitely have to get her out here as a local, either remoting in or in the studio. And then also we'll mention any conventions or special events or webinars that are of note, and certainly CEUs, things like that. I have been in the healthcare industry on and off since about 1989, 90, right around there, as a nurse's aide, a habilitation therapist, LPN trainee, and a few other roles over the years. And then in 2004, focused on music and recreation therapy, neuroscience, and research psychology. And so that's been my background since 2004. And then I found a bit of a niche using various role-playing games because nobody in TR had been doing it, and all of the textbooks say we need more intrinsically motivated, cooperative activities that are inclusive and accessible for more populations because everything's so competitive. And I kept saying, I wonder if role-playing games. And so it started the whole RPG research thing in 2004, though I've been researching those effects since 1983. We are going to be speaking at the upcoming ATRA conference in Reno. They are kind enough to have accepted all three of our proposals and then requested we do a full day workshop on the Saturday, the first day, September 14th in Reno, Nevada. And so from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., anybody who wants to learn about role-playing games, the research, the history, application to specific populations and specific facilities, we've applied it in recreation, education, entertainment, and therapeutic settings, wide range of populations from 2 years old to people well into their senior years. Autism spectrum, brain injury, muscular dystrophy, and many others. We're going to be covering that in that all-day workshop. There'll be lots of hands-on experience. And then for those who can't make that workshop, we're also signed up to do several webinars. It's going to be a little interesting logistically, but there'll be three of us down there. So Hawk Robinson, myself, and then John Welker, Vice President of RPG Research, and Danielle Whitworth, who's the treasurer for RPG Research, and both longtime volunteers there, and also employees at RPG Therapeutics, LLC. And so we'll also be doing a webinar that Saturday briefly from the 10 a.m. to noon spot for those who missed the morning session. And then Sunday we'll be doing a webinar from those who may not be able to make the afternoon session of that Saturday. And then Tuesday we'll do a final session from those who missed the very end of that first Saturday session. So the first one covers the introduction to the history, myths, and research. Second one covers the application. The third one's about professional development. So you got foundational knowledge and professional development and such there. And then also in practice. So that's what we have coming up. We'll be there with the wheelchair-accessible RPG bus and wheelchair-accessible RPG trailer prototypes and talking about that and accessibility and mobile facilities for TR practice across the country. So I hope you'll get a chance to, if you can make it to ATRA or tune into the webinars, I hope you'll join us and join the conversation. We look forward to it. The show is not meant to be a self-promotional thing, but I want to at least give a foundation for this first episode of who I am and what we're associated with and such. And you can learn more about me and my practice at HAWKE Robinson, hawkrobinson.com if you want to see a quick summary there. Or you can get more details about RPG Therapeutics, LLC at rpgtherapy.com, and then about RPG Research, the 501c3 nonprofit, at rpgresearch.com. You can learn more about the bus at rpgbus.com, and the trailer at rpgtrailer.com, and the tour across the country at rpgtour.com. see a trend here? So again, this will be a fairly short session. We will be from time to time. I have a fairly large library of TR-related books. We've got Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's collected works, many of his works. I've got all the way back to the Avedon interaction patterns, the original Avedon book, which was a little bit tricky to track down, but I like going to primary sources. Of course, we have the red book with all the wonderful assessment tools. We were using the blue book for all the ICF, ICD, World Health Organization codes. That's a little bit dated, so now there's the newer versions of those. I have those. We have, of course, the cookbook on program plan development, all these different, and Professor Datillo's. Actually, we've got multiple versions on therapeutic recreation facilitation techniques from the East Coast and the West Coast. And we will, from time to time, be talking straight from these books because all of us who are out there in the field working and such, it's always good for us to kind of refresh. In fact, some of our staff are going through the CTRS process and getting ready to take the test. So we have another broadcast that we do that's specifically just prepping for the test, literally whipping out the flashcards and such, and then discussing the topics a little more in depth. So we've got for example, these are some of the NCTRC CTRS study cards. Now, I have to say, these ones that are these punch outs from, let's see, you can get these on Amazon. It's from Mometrix Media, flashcardsecrets.com/NCTRC. I have to say, these are actually really terrible as far as flashcards go. And from the neuroscience and learning perspective, they are so poorly created. We're going to have to recreate these completely to make decent versions so it has a decent prompt question, but look at the answer. It's paragraphs. That is not how you use flashcards, and that's certainly not how neuroscience shows that people learn best. So what we do is we use these for discussion. These typically should be about anywhere from 3 to 10 cards. Any one of these cards should be broken into about 3 to a dozen cards. And we may try to do that over time to maybe put something out that's actually useful. Now, there is another version I have on my Kindle that I got to take a look at and see if it's any better. But for example, and normally we do this on Sundays from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., so you're welcome to join that. That's over on the RPG Research stream because that's for our volunteers and training and such, as opposed to this RPG Therapeutic stream. But we might do one of these, especially while I'm waiting to build up guests and co-hosts. We can just bring up these topics and help refresh. And a little bit of it's dated, too. Some of the NCTRC requirements, they're getting updated and such, but they're a little outdated based on the latest neuroscience and research psychology. And some of the terminology is quite dated. So I will point those out when I come across those. But here's one, just grabbed at random. This is assessment process. Summarize some information about an assessment instrument that evaluates functional skills related to receiving and benefiting from TR/RT services, and one that assesses functional abilities for daily living activities. Now, this is a great opportunity to pull out the red book, of course. But let's see what the answer is that it recommends for the CTRS. Again, looking at the tiny print paragraphs, you're supposed to somehow memorize that. The Functional Assessment of Characteristics for Therapeutic Recreation Revised, FACTR Factor, Peterson, Dunn, and Carruthers, 1983, Factor-R revised by Burlingame, was originally designed for adult VA hospital patients, including those receiving acute hospitalization, rehabilitation, psychiatric, geriatric, and other services. Okay. I think this is just one of many examples you could potentially come up with for daily living, but this is what they have for the flashcard. It is applicable to most populations for use as an initial screening instrument. Its purpose is to assess basic functional skills, to determine whether a client qualifies for TR/RT services, and to identify in which areas the client is most likely to improve from receiving TR/RT services. It is divided into 3 domains: physical, ambulation, general, coordination, vision, hearing, etc. That was 1. 2, cognitive, e.g. attention, orientation, concentration, long-term memory, receptive language, etc., and 3, emotional and social, e.g. functioning in dyads, small groups, competition, conflicts or arguments, etc. The assessment data are collected using observation and chart over review. The functional fitness assessment for adults over 60 years old, Osnes et al. 1996, is designed to determine functional abilities compared to age and sex norms of seniors with limited disabilities for performing ADLs. It tests 6 physical function areas: body composition, flexibility, agility/dynamic balance, coordination, strength, and endurance. Terrible way to do a flashcard, right? The content's relevant, but this needs to be broken up into many, many, many smaller pieces. So, for example, there should be a flashcard for, the factor R. List the 3 domains of the factor R, or list what original population it was meant for, the VA, and its applicable populations in general. So that includes acute hospitalization, rehabilitation, psychiatric trajectory. So break each of these into little pieces. You learn all of the content, but you get much more specific, smaller, reasonable size flashcards. Boy, whoever put these together, shame, shame, shame. I'm going to try to find some better ones, but they're what's out there heavily. But you get the idea. So we do that Sundays from 4 to 4:30, 4 to 4:45. We try not to do too much of it because human brain can only handle so much chunking and focus on certain things, and you have to change gears. And so it's more effective to do that distributed learning rather than the mass learning, as research proves. But we'll probably throw at least one of these in from time to time, unless we've got too much content to cover for that particular episode. I've been involved with talk shows and radio for nearly 15 years as well, and both terrestrial terrestrial as well as internet radio. Many, many, many different shows. Middle Earth Talk Show, Dr. Z and the Synthetic Zen Show, the Tech Talk Show, RPG Research, various entertainment shows like Heroes of the Mist. Been a guest on many other shows, Gen Con TV and Creme 2 News and others. So, just bringing all of that. And hopefully you'll find this enjoyable. It's not going to be generally comedic. It's not going to be, flashy and high energy. And often you'll be able to just listen to this in your car on a podcast when we get this added to podcast streams and such. We'll have to get a few episodes out first before we start applying to that, but we will do it, time permitting. And so hopefully folks find this useful. So I did this because I did not see, and if there is one out there, I'd appreciate you letting me know, a talk show about therapeutic recreation. A big part we want to be talking about is advocacy, because I think one of the areas that we've really suffered in rec therapy is advocacy. And part of that's shown by how few states, really have any kind of consistency of the practice. How few people even have heard of rec therapy and therapeutic recreation. I run into people all the time who have no idea. They've never even heard of the term recreation therapy and even less therapeutic recreation. I have to do the pitch and explain it, and they still don't really get it. And then I have to give specific examples. So it is we need to get that word out a lot more. And part of that is what's happening with occupational therapy, kind of eating TR's lunch. OT seems to be much better organized and better funded than the TR world, and maybe part of that's just the nature of the TR profession. A study I want to do in conjunction with Professor Messina is to check on I've had many, many, many TR professors who claim to either have been diagnosed or believe that they are ADHD, on some part of the spectrum of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, either with or without hyperactivity, with or without attention, etc. And And I was diagnosed back in the 70s and had that confirmed later as an adult as well. So I definitely can confirm an ADHD diagnosis from appropriate resources, especially the neuroeducation folks are really good at diagnosis. That's neuroeducation.com. They're actually based here in Spokane. They do a very good job with figuring out learning disabilities, cognitive functional assessments, diagnoses, etc. One of the better organizations I've seen, and they're really, really good at it. It's not cheap. It's a few $1,000s to go through a full diagnosis, but really great stuff there. And certainly in my case, one of the reasons I went into therapeutic recreation. So previously I had a very successful career in computer science and information technology and information security. I quickly climbed up and became Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer for a number of companies. I worked either for or with a whole slew of Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies, including but not limited to major oil and energy companies, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Adobe, Microsoft, the list goes on and on. And I was fortunately able to semi-retire at an early age when I was 33 and focus on raising my then very young 3 boys as a single parent. They are now all grown adults, and they are now moved to different parts of the country and coming into their own. I'm very happy. In fact, 2 of them are now married, the 2 youngest ones. And but back then, back in 2003, I came home to focus on raising the kids, but I wanted to look ahead to what I was going to do with the next stage of my life once they were grown. Was I going to go back into computer tech or something else? And one of my computer businesses was the computer training schools, and I kept getting kids with struggles, ADHD, learning disabilities, etc. The parents would come and say, help, my kid is failing typing or failing computer class or whatever. Can you help? And I'm like, well, I'm not a child psychologist, but I'll see what I can do related to the subject matter you want me to teach. And I would use games, just intuitively use games. As somebody who's struggled with ADHD, I now understand the terminology now. I didn't then, but it's an intrinsic motivation thing. And so by using games, for example, for the typing, to get them to play a video game that was improving their typing, kept them engaged. Plus I didn't know it then, but the token economies. They would get rewards and get that little dopamine hit there and reinforcement if they stayed focused on an activity or got a good report card, each week from their teacher, a report note. They would get another piece to build a computer if that was something they wanted to do. I had a lot of spare parts lying around that they could slowly assemble a computer. They wouldn't get to own the computer, but they'd get to build their own and then get it operational and actually learn how to build their own computer in my lab and such. And then I had a lot of other training programs. I had students all the way from ages about 6 or 8 all the way up to literally 96 years old. Or 86 years old. 96 was a different program here. 86 years old. Coming in, they were just I broke them into simple, small educational modules. So I went through teacher certification back when I taught at Bryman Schools and the American Automotive Institute. So I have an extensive teaching background as well. Excuse me. And again, this is the first episode, so I'm just kind of introduce you again. I don't want it to be talking about me and our organizations, but for a first episode, so you have a baseline, let you know who the heck I am. And again, hopefully we'll be talking a lot more about others as a focus in the future episodes. So I broke it into 45-minute sessions. The classes were between $10 to $20 a class. You could take the class as many times as you wanted. They were small classes. I didn't take in more than 12 students at a time. You would first we'd spend about 5 to 10 to 15 minutes first showing and discussing the topic. So let's say it's learning how to use email. Keep in mind, this is back around 2002 or so. Or it was, browsing on the web or buying online, or just some very simple, straightforward task that these people wanted to learn how to do or get better at. So then after the representation on the big screen and kind of just watching, I then have them do an activity following along on the big screen, and then we would then give them an assignment. The following along would take about 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, and then I would give them an assignment to do it on their own while I walked around and helped them if they got stuck. So we talked about it, then we walked through it, and then they figured it out on their own. And that was a very useful little program. It was one of many different approaches used with the computer schools. And so after this one kid who just completely turned around, she came in and he was sitting there typing away and doing his thing for over 20 minutes. She's like, I don't know how you do it. We've tried medication. We've tried all these other things. And he just couldn't sit still or focus for more than 5 minutes. And you've got him. I'm like, well, I just used games. To me, it made total sense. Like, well, he likes doing this. Let's see if we can incorporate the learning aspects into that activity, and lo and behold, what do you know, it works. This is, again, before I went through any of the TR training. So when I was looking at moving to somewhere else where I could afford to because if I'd stayed in California, there's no way I could have afforded to go into early retirement. I looked at I was looking at child psychology, and my psychology friends said, you might want to look at some of the specialty professions, the alternative professions. And I looked at OT and PT and MT and art therapy and RT and all of that. And ended up settling on music and recreation therapy. I'm a musician. I play over 20 instruments of all styles: world music, classical, rock, pop, funk, hip hop, jazz, you name it. And under the alias of Synthetic Zen, and I've got over more than a dozen albums and more than 200 pieces out there floating around. So, love of music. I've seen the power of music to help people. It certainly, helps me. It's a therapeutic thing for me personally, and I've seen it, so much. And then we do in our programs a lot of cooperative music, drum circles and cooperative compositions and cooperative improv jams and such. So I've seen the power of that to build community and help people build confidence, and just all sorts of wonderful benefits from cooperative type music. So eventually settled on Eastern Washington University because it seemed to have a really great program. You come out of there with a lot of hands-on experience. And the very first textbook on it was talking about a lack of these cooperative activities. And so, that's where I got in. And I didn't even go in thinking about role-playing games, but it became very clear that was a powerful modality, especially once the research started to improve, which we helped make happen. Anyway, moving forward through this whole process, we've worked heavily with the deaf community. We still run weekly sign language study groups and do activities with the deaf community. We've worked in brain injury departments, spinal cord injury departments, whole slew of at-risk populations, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, elderly populations, geriatric and others. As young as 2.5-year-old nonverbal autism spectrum with neurotypical peers in various programs through university and elsewhere. Tons of community programs, hippotherapy. I went through a lot of play therapy, the actual rigid play therapy. There's been a recent uptick of something called play therapy or therapeutic play that is not the same thing as what is licensed. There's a licensed play therapy out there, and it's very hands-off. You have the playroom is set up a very specific way, and you're supposed to just redirect everything back to the child and let the child do all of the talking, and you try to do as little and be as hands-off as possible, and you have very set scripts on how to do that. And I went through a lot of that training, thinking it might be something I'd want to include in my tool belt. But the hands-offness and such, while I see the value of it for certain needs, didn't really fit the style I was hoping to go with that I really liked more with rec therapy. But now there's a newer version that's more like rec therapy. I don't know what's going on here. I think somebody's just trying to bypass having to go through all the school and certification and other requirements. I'm not sure. It's just been happening the last year or two, but people have been speaking at conferences and everything about play therapy, and it's getting lots of hype and attention. I'll have to figure out more about what's going on with that in the future. If you know anything about it, I'd love to hear your comments about it. And then there's, of course, occupational therapy, which I did look over because they tend to have a higher income. They also have higher requirements. And, of course, I know TR is trying to push towards the master's level requirement rather than recreational. And I would love to have a discussion with some of the ATRA and NCTRC folks about that, because while on the other hand, I understand because of trying to compete with master's and doctorate level in OT and PT and such, rec therapists don't make that much money. Fortunately, I do, because I have private practice. I'm able to make a pretty good billable wage, much higher than most who are in facilities. And to raise the student debt costs that much higher by raising the degree even higher, so we have a shortage of recreation therapists, not a glut. And we want to raise the standards, but I'm concerned that we're raising it to the master's level where, we don't have licensing in most states, right? We only got half a dozen or even close to that. I'm afraid it's going to choke out the TR profession that much more. And OT is trying to do it. We had here in Washington State they've amended play and avocation, hobbies and such, to the state definition of occupational therapy. So they have intentionally encroached directly on rec therapy here in Washington State, and they're doing it across the country. If you look at the American Occupational Therapy Association website, aota.org, back in December 2017, and I've heard this many times before and since. This is an article by Chrissy Vogeli, apologize if that's mispronounced, from December 2017. And it says, the American Therapeutic Recreation Association, ATRA, describes recreational therapy as, quote, treatment service designed to restore, remediate, and rehabilitate a person's level of functioning and independence in life activities, to promote health and wellness, as well as reduce or eliminate the activity limitations to participation in life situations caused by an illness or disabling condition. ATRA 2015, end quote. Sound familiar? That, quote, statement of meaning 2015, end quote, as the association calls it, is eerily similar to the definition of occupational therapy. Although recreation therapy and occupational therapy both trace their roots back to the same beginnings, the professions have evolved differently. Recreational therapists focus on play and leisure as a means for therapy and can even be grouped into community recreation instead of healthcare. I'd say in addition to rather than instead of, by the way, as I'm sure many of you would agree. Currently, recreation therapists are seeking licensure through the country in order to be legally recognized as a profession. Because their description of recreational therapy is so similar to the model definition for occupational therapy, AOTA and state occupational therapy associations must be vigilant in monitoring any recreation therapy licensure legislation that is introduced. We do this to ensure that the recreation therapy scope of practice does not encroach on the occupational therapy scope of practice, and that recreation therapy language defines a distinct scope of practice. Legislators need to be educated about the important differences between occupational therapy and recreation therapy, including educational and experience requirements. Currently, as of this article in 2017, the District of Columbia, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Utah have licensure for recreational therapy. Washington State has registration, which is a level less than licensure, and California has title protection, which restricts the use of the term recreation therapist to only those who have met certain educational requirements. In 2016, two states, Kentucky and Pennsylvania, introduced legislation that licensed recreation therapists. Each time legislation is introduced, AOTA works with the state association on a strategy for dealing with the legislation. Notice the aggressive language here. This can include submitting testimony to the state legislature, lobbying the legislatures, crafting amendments with alternative language, and organizing a grassroots effort. AOTA does all that we can to provide support to the state associations in order to protect the occupational therapy scope of practice. Not all legislation, however, has been created equal. The enacted statute in Oklahoma, for example, clearly defines recreational therapists as using recreational and leisure activities as treatment. Therapeutic recreation or recreation therapy means the specialized application of recreation to assist with treating and or maintaining the health status, functional abilities, recreational and leisure activities, and ultimately the quality of life for individuals hospitalized and or receiving treatment for various conditions and individuals with disabilities. AOTA and state associations would be less likely to oppose a licensure bill like Oklahoma's, which has a specific definition that does not encroach on occupational therapy scope of practice. So, while I'm sympathetic to their concerns, there's a little hypocrisy, at least in the Washington State one. So, for example, here is what they modified the Washington State legislature for occupational therapy to now include the scope that overlaps intentionally with recreation therapy. So this is under RCW 18.59.020, and there's many other portions to the 18.59 section, but this is the part that's most notable. Occupational therapy, in quotes, is the scientifically based use of purposeful activity with individuals who are limited by physical injury or illness, psychosocial dysfunction, developmental or learning disabilities, or the aging process in order to maximize independence, prevent disability, and maintain health. The practice encompasses evaluation, treatment, and consultation. Specific occupational therapy services include, but are not limited to, using specifically designed activities and exercises to enhance neurodevelopmental, cognitive, perceptual, motor, sensory, integrative, and psychomotor functioning, administering and interpreting tests such as manual muscle and sensory negation, teaching daily living skills, developing pre-vocational skills and play and avocational capabilities, designing, fabricating, or applying selected orthotic and prosthetic devices or selected adaptive equipment, wound care management is provided in RCW 18.59.170, and adapting environments for persons with disabilities. These services are provided individually, in groups, or through social systems. Then they have occupational therapy aide, occupational therapy assistant, occupational therapy practitioner, etc. Now, if rec therapy is going to push for this master's level requirement for the CTRS, then it's really important to bring back the emphasis of the lower tiers of TR. So the recreation therapy assistant or something like that, so that there is still a means to get to making some kind of income as they work their way up through the educational system and potentially accumulating massive amounts of school debt or having to work their way and pay their way through bit by bit. This is something that people really need to keep in mind. We're reaching a breaking point here, if we haven't already crossed it, with the level of school debt. And so just, with rec therapy, I'm seeing more and more people who come in who wanted rec therapy. I've talked to so many who have gone off to OT and other professions simply because of the money. They have said, I really wish I could continue in TR. I can't afford to work in TR. When I came into this field, I had hoped to. I now realize I have to go on to something that I can actually cover my student debt. I can't tell you how many. I've seen a lot of people drop out of the TR program midway through when they realize what their income prospects are as a rec therapist are not that good. They do the math, and so they go off to something like OT or PT or some other field where, yes, they're going to rack up huge debt, but they're also hopeful that they'll make a better income. So that's something that needs to be taken carefully into consideration. I am a huge advocate for rec therapy and therapeutic recreation. I proselytize about it every chance I get, every talk show I'm on, every live internet broadcast, when I'm on television, etc., on stage. I do thoroughly believe that this particular approach to improving people's lives is an exceptional approach for many. I have seen time and time again with my own patients where PT and OT and other things were boring and painful, and they weren't intrinsically motivated, and we were able to find their intrinsic motivation and get them to stick to it. And then I run into them years later, and they're still doing the stuff we taught them. They've stopped doing the PT stuff, they've stopped doing the OT stuff, but they're still doing the RT things we taught them because we found the right mesh for them. With our RPG programs in the community, our goal is not to have the kids keep coming in and the adults keep coming in. Our goal is to teach them enough that then they can go run their own programs, and they do. The people we've worked with who are complete recluses because of social anxiety, panic attacks, etc., that have been able to completely turn around through graduated exposure therapy using role-playing games and such. Their lives have gone from a little bubble to a huge scope. They've gotten their world back, and now they're running games and activities out in the community, and they have friends that don't have to only come to their house, etc. They've gotten their lives back. And this intrinsic motivation aspect is just such a big factor. And there's many other factors as well. But this is, I think, one of the more powerful aspects because it's that recidivism, right? Whether it's we work with incarcerated populations, and the recidivism rate, is very high for most repeat offenders, by definition. However, research has shown that creative programs that involve drama, music, rec, things like that, can reduce recidivism anywhere from 20 to 80%. So much so now that the federal government's out there offering upwards of $20 million to have creative programs brought into these institutions. And a lot of, and you've got the spectrum of the incarcerated population on the left side, or the industry. On the far left side here, we have rehabilitation. People really care about getting the inmates the skills, social abilities, the empathy development, etc., because they're going to be back out in the world. And even if they're lifers and won't ever get parole, making them more functional while incarcerated for the next umpteen decades will make it safer for the prison workers and other inmates and can lower costs there. So for those that are purely punitive, the organizations, they don't really care about the rehab and the well-being of the inmates. They care about their bottom line and safety and security of their prison workers. Well, there's research supporting that makes it a safer environment. And so rec therapy, Professor Emily Messina, her whole dissertation was on TR programs in prison settings when she was in Florida and such. And as a female rec therapist, by the way, interesting statistic, if you take a look at the ATRA numbers, TR is about 90% female, 89, 90% female. And when I first came into it in 2004, at least in my classrooms, it was 50-50. I haven't been able to find a report from that time period of what it was actually. I don't know if it's been this way the whole time. But at least my peer group that went through the TR program, EW, when I was in my early 30s, it was about half male, half female, and it was that way for many years. And it's only in the last 5, 6, 7 years that I see most of the classrooms are almost entirely female, or highly predominantly. And not sure what's going on there, if that's just a social cultural wave or what. But anyway, to be female in a men's prison with some hardened criminals who some are never going to be discharged and feel they have nothing to lose can be a scary environment. And Professor Messina, writes at length about the challenges of trying to do these programs in such a setting, and being female, and the inner dynamics and such that happen there, and the success of this type of approach using recreation and recreation therapy and such to help turn lives around. And we've seen it with our programs, with at-risk populations and incarcerated populations. We've seen it with substance dependency transition programs. Because you find that intrinsic motivation, they will keep doing it. Right? That's the whole point. And through the recreation education program, all those things as part of our training, it really does make a difference. And I am very concerned to see that it seems like occupational therapy is eating recreation therapy's lunch. That's what it looks like. And again, my questioning about ADHD and such, there's very few people in TR that want to do research. I've been courted by multiple people begging me to go on to a doctorate level in TR, because there's a whole bunch of TR doctorates that are retiring, and those programs will shut down. But, while I do really well professionally in many different careers, I've done very well professionally, I really do struggle with school. My grades are decent, but I generally have to spend 3 to 6 times as many hours because of the ADHD and different LDs and such. Where I love teaching, and I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner. The typical university environment and the way it's structured, and the limitations I've had to work in as a professor before, or as a teacher before, and all the politics and everything else isn't very appealing to want to go on to. And now, fortunately, I don't have student debt. I've been able to pay my way through school as I've gone, and which has been wonderful. But I don't know. People keep pressuring me to do that, and I don't know. We'll see. But this is all part also where I think there are so few rec therapists who are going on to advanced degrees and doing research and such. And I think it could be a high level of ADHD in the field. I mean, think about it. So it used to be, and I've done a lot of research on ADHD and programs and such. It used to be thought that ADHD, you grew out of it, right? People thought that most people stopped having ADHD when they became adults. And that turned out not to be true for the most part. There is a developmental delay, but they eventually mostly catch up, but they still struggle with things. But what we found is most adults have developed coping mechanisms and have made life choices, career choices, environmental choices that cater more to their strengths and rather than their weaknesses. So, for example, if somebody's hyperactive and needs to be physical all the time, they're less likely to pick a desktop job and more likely to pick a physical job. Maybe it's working in carpentry, maybe it's rec therapy. An awful lot of rec therapists come from, either the jock or outdoors program background. You don't see very many people like me coming from computer science and such into the TR programs, and I wonder. So this is something that I want to do with Emily. Spin up at some point a formal study in the field where we go through ATRA and such and get as many responses as possible to see if there is a higher than average prevalence of ADHD in the TR profession. It kind of makes sense. I could be wrong, and that's the beauty of research, right? And I'm totally open to it being wrong. I would really like to know from all the anecdotal experiences and all the professors I've talked to, and then just from it kind of makes sense that the ADHD spectrum might pick this as a profession, and then that would be further reinforced by not wanting to go to more school because of the struggles with ADHD in a typical classroom environment, and wouldn't want to do the research because that's a lot of sitting down and focusing, and you can get to hyper-focus mode, but it can be very challenging to finish things. Boy, do I know. So it certainly seems plausible, but nobody's done the research, and it'd be very fascinating to find out. Excuse me, and then compare that to other professions and then the national average. So this is another research project. I've got several going on right now through EWU and WSU and some of our own, but I would love to do it someday, and it's directly relevant to TR. And maybe, I don't know who to talk to at the TR field, ATRA, NCTRC, who they would recommend for grant funding to do something like that. I don't take taxpayer grant funding, though. I'm a stickler about that. I focus on private institutional, either through membership payments, grant funding, or a private institution or something like that, or individual donations and such. I really steer away from the taxpayer-funded grants and such, because it ends up becoming programs get killed because somebody out there politically disagrees with this program, whatever the program is, X program, and they're angry that tax dollars are being used and they didn't have a say about where those tax dollars went. And so they lobby and they succeed, and then it gets shut down. There's been program after program like that here in Washington State and other states that have been shut down because one individual or one organization didn't like where their tax dollars were going. Whereas if it's not tax dollar funded, they can grumble all they want. They can maybe try the whole business boycott thing or something, but generally, it's a different issue. So I just generally like to steer away from that. I'm not really sure for TR, for doing the ADHD prevalence in the TR profession, where to turn to. So if you have any suggestions for that, I'd appreciate it. All right, so I've kind of rambled on long enough here. You got to know a lot about me. Hopefully in future episodes, we'll be able to talk and focus on others, how others got into TR, why they do this, and what they're doing to help advocate for the TR profession, what they're doing related to research in TR, if any, what they're doing as far as applied programs. If you fit any of these in any way, please reach out, contact rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com, and of course go to trtalkshow.com, and we'd love to have you on the show. Send an email explaining your background. The show is Tuesdays, 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time, so that might be a schedule challenge for some people. We could potentially do some pre-recorded interviews that I could then insert into the show when we're streaming live. So there are multiple ways to address this, but generally most people can handle a half hour to an hour, shift their lunch a little bit, or it's after, if they're on the East Coast, it's near the end of their workday, etc. we usually haven't had too much trouble with guests being able to make it work on other shows. But let me know, and we'll get you on here. If you're interested in being a co-host, if you're here in Spokane area, so much the better. We get you here in the studio. That's ideal. But we can have remote co-hosts too. We use an open source web conferencing called Jitsi, Jitsi. It works both on phone and desktops, and works quite well. We use it all the time, half a dozen times a week, to remote people from around the world for our training and other programs. So it works quite well. And it's not perfect. None of them are, but it works quite well, and it's free and cross-platform. So we can make it work if you want to be a remote co-host or either a semi-regular or regular co-host. So let me know. Again, rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com. We'll be back again next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. I'll have a little bit more of a structure worked out. Hopefully we'll have a guest or somebody, and we will cover more of the news. I was giving you a little bit of a snippet there of some of the topics we will be covering. We'll be covering the latest news from ATRA. Of course, remember the conference is coming up in Reno. If you haven't gotten the tickets yet, you should hurry and do so. And they do, I don't know if they used them up, but they had scholarships and such for students, so definitely check that out. And we are planning to be there and hope to see you there. So feel free to post your comments to the video, help spread the word, advocate for the benefits of recreation therapy and therapeutic recreation, TR professionalism, and let's get the word out. Let's help turn the tide about awareness of rec therapy, therapeutic recreation, and how therapeutic recreation specialists around the world are improving the lives of millions. Let's get the word out about that. For now, wherever you may be well, and tune in again next week, trtalkshow.com.